The folks that are really enlightened are those that make room for both sides of this argument and are not those that are judgmental and sort of assume you can't be both blank and blank. I think just embracing servant leadership, stakeholder model embraces putting others first, an others first mentality, and allowing all sides of faith arguments, if you will, or political arguments in the tent and not feel like, well, our tent only has room for this particular political view.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of The Conscious Capitalists with myself, Timothy Henry, and my partner in making the world a better place through business, Raj Jasodia. Hey there, Raj.
Hey, Timothy. Happy New Year. It's our first episode of 2025. So good to be back with you after a long trip to India. I was there for 7 weeks. Just got back a few days ago. Yeah. Very, very eventful and momentous trip, actually.
Yeah, for somebody who's just been back, you look good. I would have thought with that kind of jet lag, but you're looking good, Raj. So
it's been a week. So I can't use that excuse much longer.
So today we have a special guest, Terry Montesi, who's been a longtime member of the Conscious Capitalist community. Terry, when was the first CEO summit that you attended?
I think it was the second one, Timothy, in around 2009.
Wow, that was when we were back in the crossings.
Correct.
So you've been around a while. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Well, let me give you a little bit of background on who Terry is. He's the CEO of Trademark Property, which is a full-service real estate company that specializes in creating community-focused retail, multifamily, and mixed-use properties. He leads a team of over 100 professionals and brings a passion for placemaking, value creation, innovation to work. He's invested in, operated, developed, or redeveloped more than 21 million square feet of properties valued at over $4.5 billion across the U.S., including, and I live in Washington, out in Annapolis, which I was surprised to find out, creates meaningful experiences and long-term solutions for retailers, office tenants, and communities. He has over 40 years of experience in the commercial real estate industry, a background in leasing, investments, and development. He holds an MBA in real estate and finance from the University of Texas at Austin and was a partner at Huff Rose, McDowell, and Montesi, a real estate brokerage management advisory firm. He's also an active member of several industry organizations, and he has his own podcast called Leaning In, where he discusses trends and best practices in commercial real estate with industry partners and peers. Terry, welcome to our show.
Thank you. Thank you, gentlemen. Good to see you both.
Well, I want to start with, you're into placemaking. So tell us a little bit about what you mean by the concept of placemaking.
When we think of placemaking, you kind of start with what conventional places are. And so like shopping, so we started the retail business, and that's still a big part of what we do. That, many or most shopping centers are parking lots, sidewalks, and stores. And there's really no place, or the place that's being made there is inside the store. And so that's really not placemaking, but you also can have the same stores in a place, but let's say someone goes to the trouble, takes the time and energy to say, what would make people feel when they're here? Or what would make them feel differently? What would attract them when they don't have a need to shop, but they have leisure time. They're at home thinking, what can I do with my next hour, et cetera. So it's really it's what I say about placemaking. It is giving retail, multifamily, mixed use places, giving them something different that attracts the customer, that is not about its primary use. So the primary use or primary purpose of a shopping center is to house retailers that sell things to folks, or to house restaurants that serve folks. but it's to add another dimension that creates emotional connection. And so a public space with public art. So if you can have a restaurant with an outdoor seating area that overlooks a parking lot, which is what most do, or you can have a restaurant with an outdoor seating area that overlooks a beautiful green with a legacy heritage tree that you went to great trouble to save, under which is beautiful shaded seating, public art that people bring their kids to take pictures with, and engages people emotionally. So that's a kind of an example of how we think of placemaking and what it can do differently than convention.
Well, I love that because, obviously one of the things that's in the background here is a massive change that we've seen over the last 10 or 15 years around retail
Mhm.
and the whole idea of retail and, what's bricks and mortars, what's online, and in some ways, the lasting presence, surprisingly, of the value of bricks and mortar.
Mhm.
And and I'm curious, when you start to take placemaking and this shift in retail and that dynamic, what do you see coming in the next 5 years in that space?
Well, I think what we've learned after the retail apocalypse talk, say 10 years ago to COVID, and then and through COVID, is that, like you say, bricks and mortar is here to stay, and then you think about what's the why. Well, a big part of the why is the need for people and desire for people to interact in person,
Yes.
which, my wife was telling me the other day how she laments cell phones and how she'll be with a group of young people and everybody, they're supposed to be together, right? But they're all on their phone, and they may be talking to one another 6 feet away, but they're doing it on their phone. But there is still an obvious need for folks of all ages just to be out and interact socially, to ask, to watch other people use things, see what other people are doing, and like ask the salesperson, "Have you tried this?" etc. Part of that is education, learning, lowering their risk of acquisition. Part of it is because they just want to be out and be with people because
Mm,
it feels good. And so what we've learned, I think, is that brick and mortar is not going away. Omni-channel, the winner, is a multifaceted distribution system that includes brick and mortar, online, you know, and a combination thereof. Buy online, pick up in store. Buy online, what I did the other day, went to Walmart and I bought it at walmart.com and returned it at the store, and they made it very easy, believe it or not. I haven't returned to Walmart before, but they made it very easy, and so the the combination has really, enriched the customer experience a great deal, and it gives people choices. What's important to me today might be speed. What's
mm,
important to me today is I wanna enjoy the social, part of, acquiring goods, touching goods, watching how other people interact with goods, asking questions, learning about them, etcetera. So, it's interesting, retail in my mind is stronger than it's been during my lifetime.
mm,
Even though we thought 20, 30, 40 years ago when the consumer just ruled and our economy just rode the consumer wave. I believe retail is stronger now because it can give people everything they need, whether it's speed, you know, ease, or whether it's the social um, part. So it's a much more rich, multifaceted experience today.
beautiful.
Terry, I'm reminded of Churchill's quote when he talked about placemaking. I think he's alleged to have said, you never know who actually said these things, but we shape our buildings and then our buildings shape us.
Yeah.
Have you heard that? Right.
Oh yeah.
And
Absolutely.
I think the power of spaces to actually impact us emotionally, even spiritually, you might say, the heart and soul get connected to that. So I think that is something that you embody and your way of approaching development. How conscious would you say is the industry as a whole? Is it becoming aware of those things? Is it still the exception?
Yeah, I would say it's more conscious than it was 20 years ago or 30 years ago in particular. Um, and but overall not very. It's still very transactional. when I met Rand Staken, who introduced me, y'all both know, who introduced me to conscious capitalism, he said, I really don't work with real estate people. Oh, really? Why? He said, because I find them all transactional. And I said, well, you don't know me. And so anyway, it went from there. But yeah, anyway, I don't think the industry is gravitated very far, but there are a number of companies who are committed to placemaking and doing things that they don't necessarily have to do because it's the right thing to do.
Well, Terry, I want to pull on that a little bit because, inherent in your approach is that it's embedded in a stakeholder approach
Mhm.
because, and stakeholders are in a way about relationships. It's hard to be truly take a stakeholder orientation and then just be looking at the next deal. Um, Tell us a little bit about how stakeholder orientation affects how you approach a project. And let's pick one. You've got a new one. Is it the Vistry that's opening
The
soon?
Vickery, that's a multifamily project.
Yeah. And tell us a little bit about how maybe some of your mixed use work and other things. How does the stakeholder approach start to come to life there?
Yeah, well, that's fun. I'll pick a couple because examples make telling a story a little easier. So I'll start with the one of the first sort of heavily stakeholder influence projects, and then I'll talk about our very newest one that's under construction. So we built a project in the Woodlands. The very well known community, master plan community, 35 miles north of downtown Houston. And when we got involved, it was early days for people to build ground up mixed use in suburbs. Most mixed use was in urban areas, and the mix of uses there was very organic. Like Fifth Avenue, Madison Avenue, Manhattan, most of Manhattan, right? But it was an early project, and so we listened to the community. We really paid attention to what they needed, what they wanted, and what they didn't have. And so I remember, so we spent about $1.5 million on our public space in the middle of this project. And there weren't a handful of projects in the country where anybody had done anything like that. And fortunately, our financial partner didn't say, hey, how are we going to get a return on that? And people have asked me, how do you calculate a return on that? And that's the art part of this is you have to make decisions that you think customers and retailers, the retailers that are making the decisions will respond to, but it's really more of it's a it's an emotional response less than a pure intellectual response. And so we listened to those customers and we gave them more than they expected. And I'll tell you a story. I was at the grand opening. This project's called Market Street Woodlands, and it's a mixed use project. And it has aged beautifully. We still operate it and own a piece of it. And I was at the grand opening, and I'm standing in line at the ice cream place, and this man, and it was a happy night. Their beautiful new town center had just opened, and everybody's happy. The weather was beautiful. He says, "Hey," introduced himself, and "Do you live around here?" I said, "Well, no, I live in Fort Worth, and I'm involved with the project." And he said, "Oh, blah blah blah." Asked me more questions. He said, "I got to tell you a story. Last week, my kids, and the grand opening wasn't the day it opened. It was, 2 weeks after it opened, actually. It was the big function." And he says, we last week, the weather was beautiful Saturday, let's say. And he said, "My kids," I asked them, "What do you wanna do today?" They said, "We wanna go to the park." And I asked my kids, "What park do you wanna go to?" "The park at Market Street, this public space that we built," right? And so there's people making a decision just to go to our place because we made a place or we did placemaking that made them want to go there with no intention to shop or spend money dining. But I can guarantee you that a vast majority of the time people make a decision to go to Market Street. They may not have any goods that they need, but they are spending time and energy and then money because it's a place that feels good and people are attracted to, and that place is been very, very, very successful because we listened to the stakeholder. We made the stakeholder really important. We made the stakeholder think that they actually own the place. There's no signs that say, you've entered Trademark's property. There's this big mall developer. I won't use their name, but you go to their property, and their in their name was blank, the name of the company, Shopping Town. No matter where you were, it had their name on the center, on the mall. And, so people had no confusion about who owned that. But at Market Street, they felt like that was a public park that was part of their community, and it connects emotionally with them. And that project, the sales and the rents, it's been extraordinarily successful. So our return on the investment in placemaking has been extraordinary, but we couldn't put it in the pro forma. So then the new one, the Vickery, so our first multifamily project is under construction, and it looks very different than others. So if you look at it, it's under construction right now, and but there's a large public space. Nobody does that in a multifamily project. A large public space. We work with the area tax increment financing authority, and so we're enhancing the streets. We're adding a public space. We're adding a pickleball court that both our residents and the public can use, and we have a win-win public-private partnership that helps us get to the returns we need, but it also produces a better neighborhood for them. And those are the kind of things that I have found that the community stakeholders, or the quasi, in this case, a quasi-governmental entity, that's this TIF board, that they respond to. And it is a true win-win when you think of the community as a stakeholder and not just a customer.
Love it.
Terry, I want to live and work in one of your developments,
Well, another
that.
quick story. When at that grand opening where I met for the Woodlands project, Market Street, I'm walking around with my daughter Emma, and she was about 6. And we're walking around, and she looks up at me and she says, "Hey, Daddy, I want to live at Market Street." And so
Yeah.
she felt something, right? If she wasn't looking at the architecture and saying, "Boy, I like the architecture," she felt something, and she was pulled to want to live there. I'll never forget that moment.
That's great. That's great.
So, Terry, when I was writing Firms of Endearment, one of the companies we wrote about was a local furniture retailer here in the Boston area called Jordan's Furniture, which you may not have heard of, but they were outstandingly successful in their industry. I think their sales per square foot was 6 times the average for furniture stores, and yet their marketing spend was 1/4 the average, right? So there was something that they were doing. And if I went to their stores, so each of their stores is unique, and each of them has an entertainment element to it. So, and there's a sign, actually, a plaque as you enter one of their stores, which says there's no business that is not show business. Okay. And so they have like a roller coaster ride going through one of their stores. They have a Mardi Gras parade that breaks out in the other stores. They have a trapeze whole setup over there, in one of the other stores, etc. So each store is a destination. And they had IMAX theaters inside the furniture store, right? And it's a rare thing where our kids would actually say, "When can we go furniture shopping?" They
Yeah.
had no interest.
Exactly.
But they just loved it there. And when you bought furniture, they actually gave you these gold tokens that the kids could then use and go and get candy from these special machines and whatnot. So they just made it a whole experience, And I think that's kind of the trend over the years, and what you're also describing here. There used to be a phrase called edutainment. There's education and entertainment happening alongside the sales and the transactions. So is that still I think, what is that one where you can climb a wall or you can go fishing, I think in Bass Pro Shops and so forth. So those elements are becoming even more pronounced, would you say, over time? Education, entertainment.
Yeah, and entertainment, is where restaurants are becoming entertainment venues or leisure venues. Oh yeah, I think that's a big part of, when we're designing something or redeveloping something, is, again, what can we do to make our project or our public spaces or public realm in our project, what can we do to make them draws, make them anchors, make them a part of the reason people come here. Again, that's not just transactional or filling a need, but makes these places leisure destinations, and you can do that in a lot of different ways. But yeah, so and edutainment and some retailers, etc. You come to their store to learn about how to use a product, etc. And I mentioned that earlier. That is clearly one of the ways retailers are attracting customers.
Well, I know that you mentioned earlier, and this is a theme that often comes up. People say, yeah, yeah, all this purpose stuff, this why, this conscious capitalism, that's great, but let's talk about the bottom line. And you sort of played over it a little bit, but one of the things that hits me in talking with you is that, I couldn't put that on the pro forma. And yet, because we do these things, because we operate this way, we have higher levels of performance. And so one, I'd love you to talk about that and your experience about, you know, w- trying to explain to people that operating this way really does lead to better performance for everybody. As you said, it's a win-win for everybody.
There's a couple of things I would say. One is, I made a decision long ago that I was going to operate this way because it's consistent with the life I wanted to lead, you know? Servant leadership, as we talked a little before we went on air, it just that felt right to me. And so, part of it is, that's just I was gonna do it, and then if it didn't work, maybe I would have to stop. But, I wasn't gonna ask. I was gonna keep doing it, and every project we do, the whether it's the public art or whether it's the interiors or whether it's the architecture, we do more than we have to. We are just not a commodity, real estate company. We're not creating widgets that look the same, and the only thing different is the location. We're curating, customizing for that particular neighborhood, and we want the experience to be something that is just better than anyone else provides. And I do think that whether that produces a better return, part of that is what are the capital markets doing at the time you're going to exit. You don't necessarily have control of that, but I do firmly believe it lowers our risk, and it puts more upward pressure on rents and occupancy, that our places are more special than they had to be. And yes, have I seen it pay off? Absolutely. And also, when you're hiring people, or when you're trying to retain people, folks wanna work a place they feel good about. They wanna work a place they're proud to go to work. They know that they're making a difference, and the way we can make a difference that lasts is one of the things that always really attracted to me, is because that Market Street Woodlands project, that will far outlive me, and it is a legacy of smiles and people getting engaged and people feeling like, "Man, I'm not leaving this community because I have a rich amenity set," Market Street Woodlands being one of them. Making that kind of difference in people's lives and the lives of communities, um, it's just it feels good to be a part of that business, for sure. And like I said, it is good business for sure. I had a kid. I'm back to Market Street. I had a kid I was interviewing to be a young developer. I'll make this quick. And he, he said, "Well, I was asking about his mindset." He had been at a conventional transactional development company, and he said, "Well, I've never had an unlimited budget like you guys." And I said, like, pause for I go, What makes you think we have an unlimited budget?" Because I've always had institutional capital, so they don't give me unlimited budgets. And he said, "Well, like at Market Street, you built that fancy public space, and if at my company, I would have had to put buildings there." And so he's like, "I don't know how I could have told my partners I was getting a return on that." And I just like, of course, I knew immediately that guy wasn't going to be for us. But then I told him a story that Tommy Bahama, who has a big 11,000 foot store right on the public space, is a restaurant in the back and retail store in the front, and it was one of the first early marquee tenants. I said, "Well, they told us that was it not for that public space, they wouldn't have gone here because they go in resort areas." And they said, "Because we built a resort-like place that would make people feel like they were on vacation, they were willing to go in a place like the Woodlands, whereas before they'd only been in, like Orange County or Naples, Florida, or uh, Scottsdale, Arizona." And so anyway, you know, you tell that story, and so then Tommy Bahama goes, and because we made the Tommy Bahama deal, that but for the public space, Tommy Bahama wouldn't have gone. A ton of other people followed, and then the rest is history. And that's been one of the most profitable projects we ever did. And it had the largest investment in sort of public amenities, non-direct return amenities of any project we've ever done.
I love it.
Wow. That's a beautiful phrase, Terry. More special than they had to be. That's a
Yeah.
mantra now. I'm going to put that on my wall here.
Yeah.
I love it. I love the way you think. And I want to know a little bit about the background. You mentioned servant leadership and your faith-based approach in life. And if you can talk about some of your formative experiences and how you brought that into the world of business and leadership.
Yeah. And so part of the Christian faith, and the big lesson is other centrism, is willing to die for others. That's pretty other centric. And that, and how other centrism, to me, servant leadership is the humility to serve, and that the leaders that in Good to Great, Forms of Endearments, some of the great leaders, or the level 5 leaders, whatever you label them, are those that have humility. And humility is part of what that is putting others first. It's not demeaning yourself, but it's putting others first. And so when I heard about conscious capitalism, and learned more about stakeholder model, though I didn't know the label, but we already were thinking about business that way. It seemed very consistent with my faith, and so I just tried to incorporate it. And our purpose statement is to be extraordinary stewards, enhance communities, and enrich lives.
Oh,
And
Terry, stop. Say that again
to be
slowly.
to be extraordinary stewards, enhance communities, and enrich lives. And it's been our purpose statement for probably 15 years, 14 years. And we've never changed it. We review it every year. We've never changed it. But if you just think about that, that's really not about us. Now, the enriched lives piece, yes, some of the lives being enriched are our investors or our employees, but we are just one of the stakeholders. And that statement sort of encompasses a stakeholder mentality.
Well, I love that because you bring up an interesting angle, which has sometimes puzzled me, but I think that you can help us in this space, which is, the whole faith-based community. If there's any place where conscious capitalism ought to resonate, it should be in those faith-based leaders or in the faith-based communities. And I think to this time, we haven't gained as much traction in that area as we could have. Now, I sit on the board of a bank that's very faith-based, and um, and and yet, and I'm wondering, Terry, what's your view on that? Well, how do we bring more faith-based leaders who believe that, we need to be a man for others or a person for others? How do we bring more of that to life?
Well, I think a couple of things jump out at me. So one is the stakeholder model, servant leadership are so consistent with, many faiths. It's, serve others, right? Love others, serve others, servant leadership. Those are super consistent. I think one of the issues is that, it's there's some predisposition to think if you are conscious or enlightened. You are that with enlightenment, you must be a progressive or a liberal politically, and that many many folks in at least in the US that are faith centric are more conservative. And so I don't mind saying that I have felt from time to time, not at all the time and not at every summit, but I've felt a couple of times at different summits where the 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 political, mindset got involved, and it's like, you how can you be faith-based and maybe have some which has some conservative views attached to it and be this enlightened person? And so I think like you have exhibited to me already here, it's a both and. It's not a
Yeah.
either or.
Yeah.
Um, and I think the folks that are really enlightened are those that make room for both sides of this argument and are not those that are judgmental and sort of assume you can't be both blank and blank. And so I think just embracing servant leadership, stakeholder model, you know, embraces putting others first and others first mentality and allowing all sides of sort of faith arguments, if you will, or political arguments in the tent and not feel like, well, our tent only has room for this particular political view. Because if you're this political view, you're more enlightened, which means you're more aligned with stakeholder model. I don't think that at all. And I have from time to time felt like I stood out a little bit in a way I wasn't happy that I stood out, but is okay. Or maybe I was happy, or maybe I was conflicted. You know, um, I think that's part of it. Embrace it, but embrace while you're embracing all sides and professing the importance of listening to both sides. That's true enlightenment, I think. It's the old definition of, the genius, someone who can embrace, and argue both sides of an argument.
Yeah, that's a very important point you've made, Terry. And you probably have heard Rand Stegan at the CEO Summit talk about higher ground, right? Where we can actually find commonality so the political stuff falls aside.
And I love that frame that he made. By the way,
Yeah,
that was
yeah.
that was one of my favorite moments this past year.
And in Mexico, I worked with companies and leaders who are part of this. So it's called His Way at Work, I think. That is a movement or organization. And there's also Ken Blanchard, I think, started Lead Like Jesus, right? So I think, and of course, in the Indian spiritual tradition, there's tremendous overlap between those teachings and what we talk about in conscious capitalism. So I think bringing spirituality and even faiths and religions more explicitly into this, because at a high level, they are all aligned. And everything we're talking about here is
I,
consistent.
I love that, Raj, because, I was reading something this morning, in my daily reading, and it said it's not so much about what you believe, it's whether you're believable. And I thought that was brilliant. It was like, yeah, you could say, I believe in this, but what are you doing? Are you believable because your actions are aligned with whatever those beliefs are? So it's not enough to sort of say, I'm not religious, I'm spiritual, or I'm faith-based, or it's really, to your point, Terry, are you taking a stakeholder approach? Are you taking a conscious leadership, a servant leadership approach? And it's the action that speaks so much louder than whatever words you were using.
Are you an example of living your faith? You know? And it's interesting. I have struggled at Trademark from time to time with, like, praying before company meetings, and I did that for years, and then I got a few comments, and shame on me for listening to the few, but I got a few comments that said, like, we do surveys, anonymous surveys, and is there anything we can do different? Anything we could do more or less of? Not pray because you're, forcing your ideas on me, etc. And, so, like, I would withdraw a little bit, for a little while but then I had time to think about it and talk to others, and that, vocal minority, sort of not allowing them to make me, behave inauthentically. So I'm back. I tell everyone, this just because I'm asking the Lord to bless our year does not mean I'm trying to convert you. Um, just but I wanna just ask the Lord to bless our year, and, so I've kinda gotten back on it, but I agree. I just golly, if we could the higher ground of allowing people to be themselves and to not be afraid to be a conservative or a liberal or a progressive, and that we should be able to lead. If we're gonna have a stakeholder model mindset, and everyone at a CEO summit is a stakeholder, and treat them as such with equal respect, whether they align with your spiritual, point of view or not. I think leading and being explicit, Raj, like you said, about it, that, "Hey, we at Conscious Capitalism are here. We embrace people who believe that capitalism can be a force for good, that in our businesses, we can use our businesses to make the world a better place." Simple. It's a very simple thing. But we also believe that to do that best in community, we need to have deep respect for each other's points of views, and not make anyone feel out of place for theirs.
Yeah, I love that. And Terry, I'd like to go back to a little bit of, because underneath this is a mindset and an approach to business. And, I'm always amazed that, you can be like you, very articulate about why this is important to you. And you can show superior performance. And and yet there are others who are sort of saying, that's all this soft stuff, Terry. Forget about this. It's business. And and I'm curious, how do you answer that question when people do challenge you on that and say, oh yeah, that's all, faith or spirituality or any, yeah, who cares? Like it's about business, Terry. Show me the pro forma.
Yeah, it's interesting. Fortunately, Timothy, even in a transactional business using institutional capital, I think they're all pretty aware of the power of, stakeholder model thinking. I think they're very aware of the power of, for instance, sustainability. Um, that has become in real estate something that is almost a requisite, and not a soft side, um, thing that just a few people who fancy themselves enlightened think about. And I have gotten very little pushback on having a line item for public art, or, people that are attracted to us, I guess, are, they like the idea of placemaking, and that's part of what they like about us. And so it's possible that the hyper transactional institutional capital, looks at our website and maybe they're not interested in us. Here's all I can say is
Self-selecting.
yeah, yeah, there are enough that are, that select, or are at least aligned enough, or maybe they just believe in the financial power of stakeholder model and placemaking, and, any of the above reasons to do business with us are fine, because it still accomplishes the goal. I haven't had that much resistance to it, fortunately.
So what are your, if you were advising a young developer going into the real estate business or a young entrepreneur, what are a couple things that you would say, hey, here's what I wish I knew when I was starting out like you, and how to balance these things, how to stay true to your purpose and your values and be a good business person.
Yeah, well, I think you've got to know that the numbers have to work. Um, First and foremost, investors are not gonna take a significantly lower return or take a significantly higher risk just to be good guys. That the market hasn't so much evolved there. Now, I don't deal with, exclusively impact investors, et cetera, so I'm not well versed there. and I'm not sure whether they do either, but, stay out of that. But I'd say the numbers have to work, but also that I have had experience that the numbers can work, doing things a little better and different if you just from the start, you sort of include that mindset. I've never lost a deal because we had, a richer amenity budget than our competitors might have incorporated. I can tell you that. So it's just, it is a mindset from the start, and that if you have conviction about making the world a better place and, having uh, good or above average investor performance, it is out there. It can happen. And the only way it won't happen is if you don't try it. And if you don't have any conviction around it. And if all it is about for you is making money, what I'd say that's going to be less satisfying. I think that's one of the big things. It is, and I told y'all that story earlier, and this is a good place to use it. It is less satisfying to be purely transactional. I'll never forget I went on a Homes of Hope trip, which is a trip, that YPO introduced me to, on which my wife and I and our kids built. We went like 14 or 15 times. You build a home in 3 days for a needy family in Mexico or Costa Rica. And I'm on the plane coming back one time, and I'm not the type that writes white papers. I'm on the plane and I just got this notion to write a white paper, and it was pretty articulate. And and it's was basically how I never felt as good or as self-actualized or, a part a productive, positive part of the universe as I did when I was serving. And I wasn't a CEO, I wasn't a MBA, I wasn't you know, a fluent US citizen. I was just a guy with a hammer and a tool belt, you know, bloody in my fingers, working right next to the homeowner whose family, uses the bathroom in a hole in the ground. And so I just think I'd tell those young entrepreneurs, it is more satisfying if it's about more than just money, if it's about more than just you, and if you are doing something that actually it makes people's lives better, makes them feel good, not just a commodity or a transaction.
Beautifully
Beautiful.
said, Terry. Beautifully said.
Hmm.
If you look back and you think about, this notion of servant leadership and, who were your role models? Who were the people that were successful business people that you looked at and said, they're not only successful leaders, but that they're also servant leaders?
Well, I'll start with my dad. My dad his parents were Italian immigrants. And I'd say I didn't mention that as a part of my story, but there's no question that me being old enough to have, be really in touch with my ancestors that immigrated, that came here with nothing. My grandmother once told me they literally, when they got to Mississippi first, they worked in the fields making 50 cents a day. Think about that. And so that I hear that story. So being in touch with that, so my grandparents, my parents, being in touch with that has definitely grounded me to be grateful. You know, I just, I think we all, the three of us are all always talking about gratitude at CEO summits and the power of gratitude. Well, it was sort of forced on me to be grateful that my grandparents undertook that, harrowing adventure to come over here with nothing. And then grateful that my parents, paid for a college education, and they really did authentically have grandparents and parents as, they were servant leaders because their whole life and mindset was around creating a better future for their kids and grandkids. That was it. And, you come to my generation and my kids' generation, it's less about that because we're less in touch with that. So my dad, this humble guy, was a very successful business person, but he made decisions like I don't want to go into business to this place that's far away because I'll have to be away from my family more often, even though I could make more money probably. But that wasn't his priority. So I saw somebody who said, money is not the driver. You know, being famous or bigger than some other company is not the driver. So that was really my authentic, role model. And then I guess I just started paying attention. But in some ways, I was motivated a lot by what I saw in the real estate community was not happening. That it was so transactional that it turned me off. And so I wanted to build things, and I wanted to be the artist, the creative. I'm a right brain. I wanted to be the creative side of a developer, that did things better that were not purely transactional. And I wanted to kind of run from that hyper transactional, it's all about money sort of mindset that I saw in a lot of real estate people.
No, I'm just very inspired, Terry. We've known each other for 15, 16 years. At the conferences, we say hello, but we never really got to learn your story to this extent. And it's incredibly inspiring. So thank you so much for who you are and how you show up in the world and so much that you have to teach. So it's really been a joy to hear your journey.
Yeah, Terry, it's been great. I often say that we're in the courage and confidence business at some level. We have to help leaders have the courage to do the kind of things you're saying and the way you're demonstrating it. So, it's not only about belief, it's being believable, and you're very believable in that way. And I really think that inspiration is important. If you can do it in real estate and show that you can make, do good, stay true to who you are, and make a significant profit in that, we need more and more of those stories. So Terry, thank you for being a trailblazer that way.
Well, thanks. I think about the one other thing I might say to entrepreneurs, it's, if you want to separate yourselves, there's one word that just keeps jumping out of me. It's care. Care about the people that are going to use your place that you create. Care about the residents that are going to live in your multifamily project. And so you just really care about them. What can I do a little different or better? How can I take time to work or think a little differently so that they will feel more proud about where they live? They can feel better. They can want to invite their friends over because, look at where I live. And, you're building up people's self-esteem. It's just so, I think if you think in a more complex way about what you're doing, you can get real motivated to do better.
I love it. I love it. For such words of wisdom, Terry, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank
Thanks,
you.
gentlemen. Thank you.
And thank you to our listeners. And if you enjoyed today's podcast, please go over to Apple and iTunes and leave us a comment or a rating. And whatever channel you're listening to, please feel free to hit the subscribe button. And thank you to Conscious Capitalism, Inc., who is our sponsor for our program, and to Rainbow Productions for making sure that this works. And we'll look forward to hearing or seeing you next week.